A humble woman was kicked out of car dealership, but the next day her millionaire husband's Bentley arrives. Rebecca Hamilton was a woman of quiet grace, who rose early every morning to tend to her small vegetable garden under the gentle glow of the waking sun. She lived in a quaint, single-story home on the outskirts of a sleepy town, the sort of place where neighbors recognized one another by the shape of silhouettes through the windows and the distinctive hum of different car engines. Despite the modesty of her living space, she treasured every inch of her surroundings, from the slightly crooked fence that separated her yard from the dusty road to the patch of wildflowers growing untamed by the back door. She always greeted the world with humility, whispering a thankful prayer each morning for the life she had been granted, never once begrudging the limitations that others might see in her humble circumstances. She spent the bulk of her mornings tidying the house in comfortable silence, dusting off picture frames that lined the mantel and carefully washing the dishes from last night's dinner, thinking fondly about how blessed she felt to have a roof over her head and a heart filled with such quiet contentment. Her style was unassuming. She wore simple blouses and well-worn jeans, usually faded from repeated washings, and she had a certain easy confidence in her gait, a sense of belonging in the world precisely as she was. In her mind, money was only a tool, not a source of identity, and she had found that her happiness was rooted in living by her values of modesty and compassion, allowing her to live each day without the invisible shackles that often accompany substantial wealth. She believed it was better to speak of her husband, Gregory Hamilton, as a loving partner and doting supporter of her simple life, a man whose success was matched only by his kind heart. She made a point of connecting with people based on shared humanity rather than the superficial allure of a luxury lifestyle, and the small circle of friends she did have appreciated her for her warmth rather than her last name. Sometimes, the faint hum of a classic radio station drifted through the house, playing gentle tunes from decades past, enveloping her living space in a subtle nostalgia that mirrored her longing for simpler times unburdened by modern complications. Her days were a tapestry of small, deliberate acts, from sweeping the front porch of fallen leaves to methodically sorting the recycling, punctuated by a friendly wave to passing neighbors who walked their dogs or carried groceries home. Her interactions in the town were invariably polite, even with strangers who barely acknowledged her, for she took solace in the idea that sowing politeness would eventually yield compassion in return, even if it was just a sliver. She cultivated tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers, relishing the feel of sun-warmed soil between her fingertips and the subtle perfume that rose from the plants after a gentle watering. Her harvest was often shared with the neighbors or donated to the local shelter, as she believed strongly that blessings should be multiplied through generosity. On any given afternoon, she could be seen kneeling in the earth, singing softly to herself with a serenity that drew curious glances from passers-by, who wondered how she seemed so content despite her seemingly humble station. In her spare time, she delighted in small hobbies that allowed her to indulge in creativity without pretense, such as painting watercolors of birds and wildflowers, or trying new recipes from tattered old cookbooks she found at garage sales. Each evening, she compiled her reflections in a weathered journal, where she wrote entries filled with gratitude, observations of the changing seasons, and recollections of small moments of joy from her day. The journal was her faithful companion, a testament to the life she nurtured, and she would lock it away in a simple wooden box each night, trusting that her secrets and insights would remain safe within those pages. Her husband, though often away, never failed to call or send messages that brightened her routine, reminding her of the depth of his affection and his admiration for her uncomplicated values. The townspeople, clueless about Gregory's billionaire status, simply assumed he was another hard-working individual who traveled a lot, and they sometimes wondered how Rebecca managed to hold her head high all alone for extended stretches of time. She remained undeterred, convinced that anyone can navigate life's ups and downs with patience, warmth, and faith in human goodness, especially if they refuse to become consumed by material comparisons. Occasionally, she would receive elegant gifts from Gregory. He might mail her a delicate necklace or a rare book edition that he knew she would treasure, but she always kept these tokens of affection private, cherishing the sentiment behind them rather than seeing them as proof of privilege. If acquaintances pressed her with intrusive questions about her finances, she would respond vaguely but politely, shifting the focus to the conversation at hand, deftly redirecting any awkward queries about her husband's true identity. Such gentle evasions only increased the air of mystery around her. But because she was so cordial and unassuming, people generally chalked it up to shyness rather than secrecy. If the truth about her husband's massive fortune had been an open secret, it might have prompted false friendships, unsolicited solicitations, and the envy of neighbors who previously treated her with disinterest. Her greatest joys were the intangible moments, such as the laughter of a friend during a shared meal or the delight of discovering a new bloom in her garden, small slices of heaven that enriched her spirit more profoundly than any sum of money could. She thrived on the belief that the substance of life was built on genuine connections rather than transactions, and that love, friendship, and community were the foundations of a legacy worth leaving behind. Each night, after cleaning up from dinner and double-checking that the doors were locked, she would stare at the moon through the living room window, thinking about Gregory and the day they would finally have more time together. She suspected that his business ventures took him to many places where people were far less gentle, and she worried sometimes that the cutthroat nature of his industry might tarnish the gentle soul she knew and loved. Yet his words and actions always reassured her, and despite their physical distance, they seemed closer in spirit than many couples who lived under the same roof day after day. Whenever he did come home, if only for a night, they filled their modest abode with quiet laughter and whispered conversations into the early hours, cherishing every second. Their love story was one of contrasts, her simple world intertwined with his grand ambitions. Yet they existed in a state of perfect balance that few could understand, let alone believe. She found a certain poetry in his complexity, a reassurance that beneath the surface of life's glitter, there could be authenticity and a profound desire for genuine goodness. Over time, she had witnessed stories of wealthy families and their complicated dramas, of friends suddenly turning into sycophants, and she was determined not to fall victim to such insincerity. Instead, she nurtured an environment where no one suspected she was anything but a simple woman leading a simple life, and her days were filled with the gentle rhythms of a slower pace, an appreciation of life's fleeting yet sublime moments. When she thought about the future, her daydreams weren't cluttered with visions of mansions or shiny cars, but rather with images of a peaceful life, a stronger community, and a sense that her heart was still free from the illusions of status. Her most urgent desires were to see the flowers bloom anew each spring, to take meals to the elderly and disabled, and to walk through her neighborhood at sunset, greeting families who waved from screen doors. She believed life's true richness was in these little joys, the ones that required no account statements or public affirmations. It was into this unassuming life that the seeds of an impending conflict were quietly sown, for the day would soon come when her hidden connections to wealth would crash into the assumptions of strangers, testing her resolve to stay gracious and kind. Yet in these first moments of the story, as she hummed softly and cared for her plants, there was no hint of drama or conflict, only the gentle certainty that she was where she belonged. When the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky with pinks and oranges, she would linger outside, gazing at the changing palette of the heavens before retiring indoors with a peaceful heart. And it was with that peaceful heart, unaware of the disrespect she would soon face, that she nurtured the seeds of resilience and compassion that would serve her well in the trials yet to come. One bright, late summer morning, Rebecca found herself carefully reviewing the pages of her old car's maintenance logs, noticing it was long overdue for a routine checkup, which prompted her to gather her purse, slip into a comfortable pair of shoes, and head out to the only upscale dealership in town. Although she harbored no intention of buying a lavish vehicle, her husband's absence and her preference for straightforward, reliable service led her to the dealership, which claimed to provide expert maintenance for all makes and models. As she neared the large glass doors, a wave of apprehension briefly brushed across her mind, for she knew many dealerships in the area often catered to affluent clients. Yet she believed that, at its core, any reputable business should treat every customer with respect. Upon entering, she was greeted by the cool blast of air conditioning and the gleaming interior lights that bounced off the showroom floor, illuminating the rows of sleek, polished automobiles that promised speed, luxury, and status. Her footsteps, soft and measured, went almost unnoticed as she approached the front desk where a young receptionist tapped away on a computer, barely looking up from the screen. Rebecca, with her gentle voice and modest attire, politely explained that she was hoping to get a service appointment for her aging sedan, one that had carried her faithfully through countless grocery runs and volunteer shifts. The receptionist paused for a moment, cast a quick glance at Rebecca's simple clothing, and offered a curt nod, mumbling something about checking the schedule while seemingly more interested in an incoming text on her phone. As Rebecca waited, she took note of the sleek black sedan gleaming in the center of the showroom, a model so expensive that she doubted anyone in her neighborhood could afford its monthly payments, let alone the full cost. She admired the impeccable wax job and the fine leather seats, not out of envy, but out of genuine appreciation for craftsmanship, thinking how her husband, Gregory, would find the engineering intriguing, even if neither of them truly needed such extravagance. Moments later, another employee, dressed in a crisp suit and sporting an expensive watch, briskly strode up to the receptionist, casting a skeptical eye toward Rebecca before whispering something inaudible to his colleague. Rebecca, overhearing only fragments of the hushed conversation, sensed the underlying disdain, but chose to maintain her polite demeanor, softly interjecting that she would be happy to wait until they could confirm an appointment time. In response, the receptionist gave a dismissive wave of her hand and told Rebecca to take a seat, pointing to a waiting area furnished with plush chairs and a coffee station that boasted premium brews and an array of sweeteners. Attempting to make the best of the situation, Rebecca selected a chair in the corner and quietly observed the bustle of sales associates moving with practiced efficiency, their eyes constantly scanning for prospective buyers who exuded wealth. Every so often, a well-dressed couple or a businessman in a tailored suit would enter the dealership, commanding immediate attention from multiple staff members who rushed to greet them with bright smiles and flattering compliments. Rebecca noticed that, in stark contrast, she remained almost invisible, receiving little more than a fleeting glance from those passing by, as though her mere presence suggested she had no value as a potential client. After nearly 20 minutes of watching friendly greetings and overhearing talk of horsepower, financing, and monthly payments that dwarfed what she spent on groceries, she approached the front desk once again to inquire about her appointment. The receptionist offered no apology for the delay, instead answering tersely that a mechanic had called in sick and that they weren't sure if they'd have any time for minor requests that day, a statement dripping with the assumption that Rebecca's needs mattered little. Despite the slight, Rebecca's patience remained intact, and she kindly asked if she could leave her number to be contacted when they had availability, genuinely believing that an open line of communication might be the best way forward. The suited employee who had whispered earlier reappeared, intercepting her offer and questioning whether her car was truly worth servicing at their facility, given its age and brand that was typically not sold at this luxury dealership. Rebecca blinked in surprise, but calmly explained that she understood the dealership had a specialized service center open to all vehicles and that she was simply following the guidelines listed on their website, which advertised broad mechanical expertise. Her explanation seemed to irritate the man, who crossed his arms and commented that perhaps she had misunderstood the type of clientele they usually served, his voice dripping with condescension. Undeterred by his dismissive attitude, Rebecca politely reiterated that she was willing to pay for any services rendered, as she would at any other reputable mechanic, but hoped to rely on the dealership's promise of top-quality maintenance. At that, the man let out a barely concealed scoff and gestured to another associate, who then stepped forward to reinforce that their brand prided itself on exclusivity, implying in no uncertain terms that Rebecca's modest appearance did not fit the image they curated. Feeling tension rise, she tried to remain composed, calmly asking if she could speak to the manager, sincerely hoping that a higher-ranking individual would show the professionalism and courtesy she had originally expected. A short, brusque woman with a severe haircut soon emerged from an office near the back of the showroom, her posture rigid and her eyes scanning Rebecca as if searching for a reason to dismiss her before she even spoke. Before Rebecca could fully explain her request for service, the manager interrupted, citing a backlog in appointments, a lack of available technicians, and the company's focus on clients who had purchased vehicles directly from them. Trying one more time to salvage the situation, Rebecca maintained her pleasant tone, offering to schedule a date in the future or even pay a deposit to ensure her slot. But each suggestion was met with an obstinate refusal. As she stood there, surrounded by gleaming cars that symbolized wealth and prestige, Rebecca found herself struck by a sense of disbelief that any business would so blatantly undervalue a willing customer, especially one who approached them with such civility. The air seemed to thicken with awkwardness, as a few other patrons paused to watch this subdued exchange, their faces registering mild curiosity at why this plainly dressed woman continued to insist on being heard. At length, the manager's frustration boiled over, and she told Rebecca that if she wasn't there to purchase a new luxury vehicle, she was occupying the time and space that could be better devoted to serious buyers. Rebecca offered an apologetic smile, murmuring that she hadn't meant to inconvenience anyone, but her attempts at courtesy only seemed to spark deeper antagonism, the manager's glare intensifying. An uneasy hush fell over the immediate vicinity, as though those within earshot sensed the hostility in the manager's tone, and a few employees cast sympathetic glances at Rebecca, though none dared speak up in her defense. In that moment, Rebecca recalled the myriad times she had been overlooked in social situations simply because she didn't wear flashy clothes or flaunt an expensive handbag, and she resolved, once again, to remain true to her gentle nature despite the sting of prejudice. Finally, with a dismissive flick of her hand, the manager told Rebecca to leave, making it clear that her business was neither welcome nor considered profitable for the dealership's bottom line. Standing there, a flood of emotions ran through Rebecca: disappointment, embarrassment, and an undercurrent of anger, but she caught her breath, remembering that she had promised herself never to respond to cruelty with cruelty. She mustered a final wave of kindness, thanking them for their time and wishing them a good day, though her words went unanswered as she turned on her heel and walked out into the sweltering midday sun. The glossy showroom doors slid closed behind her with a soft hiss, sealing off the manufactured world of polished metal and subdued lights, leaving Rebecca alone in the stark brightness of reality. She paused for a moment by her battered old sedan, running a hand over the hood as if to calm both the car's weary engine and her own troubled thoughts, marveling at how swiftly courtesy had decayed into outright contempt. Even as she pulled out of the dealership's parking lot, leaving behind its proud architecture and shiny vehicles, she could not shake the feeling that she had been judged, and ultimately dismissed, purely on the basis of appearance, an experience that cut deeper than any insult to her finances. In the solitude of her drive home, she fought back tears, not because of the rejection, but because such overt discrimination and rudeness weighed heavily on her spirit, reminding her that even the simplest of women can become unwelcome in places driven solely by the prestige of wealth, a realization that would echo in her thoughts long after she parked the car in her modest driveway. Rebecca's eyes burned with unshed tears as she guided her aging sedan down the winding road back to her modest home, every bump in the pavement seeming to echo the ache in her heart, reminding her of the cruel words and dismissive gestures she had endured. She tried to draw strength from the cloudless sky overhead, the soft yellows of the descending sun promising a restful evening. Yet each passing mile felt heavy with the weight of self-doubt that the dealership staff had thrust upon her. The once welcoming sight of familiar shops and quiet neighborhood streets failed to offer solace, instead intensifying her awareness of the stark contrast between the warmth of her simple life and the cold arrogance she had just faced. By the time she pulled into her driveway, a swirl of conflicting emotions had begun to settle in the pit of her stomach, part disbelief that anyone could be so openly unkind, part conviction that she must not lose her gentle spirit in the face of cruelty. Even before stepping through her front door, she made a conscious effort to slow her breathing, reminding herself that her home was a sanctuary, free from the judgment of strangers who measured worth by wealth and appearances. Still, the moment she crossed the threshold, her composure wavered as she found herself momentarily immobilized in the entryway, the fading light illuminating the simple furnishings she normally found so comforting. In that flicker of hesitation, she realized that her faith in human kindness had been shaken more severely than she cared to admit, and she resolved to confront the complicated swirl of sadness and anger that threatened to claim her thoughts. She tried to busy herself with mundane tasks, hanging her purse on the hook, placing her keys in the small clay dish near the door, and checking the mail, but her fingers trembled, her heartbeat accelerated, and a quiet despair began to seep into her spirit. Gathering her courage, she slipped off her shoes and made her way into the living room, where the late afternoon sun spilled through the windows, illuminating the pictures on the mantel and the worn rocking chair that used to be her grandmother's. She settled into that chair, the soft creak of wood beneath her offering an odd sort of comfort, and tried to quell the restless sadness clawing at her chest by staring at the photographs of friends and family perched on a nearby shelf. Each image reminded her of her modest upbringing, the laughter she had shared with people who valued authenticity over luxury, and for a moment she found her burdens easing, as though the pure memories were a balm against the harshness she had encountered. Yet, despite her attempts to focus on gratitude, the sting of dismissal lingered at the forefront of her mind, a low hum of hurt that refused to fade, and she realized with a pang that not even her well-honed optimism could blot out the memory of the manager's scornful sneer. She closed her eyes and tried to pray for clarity, whispering a few shaky words of thanks for her blessings. But her voice faltered with the weight of the day's humiliation, and hot tears finally escaped down her cheeks. Rather than fighting them, she let the tears come, silent and steady, believing that acknowledging her pain was more honest than bottling it up or denying its impact on her soul. When the tears subsided, she rose to rinse her face with cool water in the small, tidy bathroom near the hallway, catching her reflection in the mirror and feeling a fresh pang at the sight of her reddened eyes and the tremble in her lips. The woman staring back at her was both the same as before and irrevocably changed, burdened by the knowledge that her gentle nature could be used as a target by those who saw her kindness as weakness. She reached for a towel, determined to compose herself, and told herself that the cruelty of strangers should never define who she was or how she navigated the world. Yet a lingering shame gnawed at her, intensified by the thought that perhaps she had been naive to believe everyone at the dealership would treat her with respect, despite her unassuming appearance and the absence of ostentatious wealth. Part of her wished to call Gregory right away, to let him soothe her fears and reaffirm her worth. But she hesitated, uncertain if it was fair to add another burden to his already demanding schedule. Instead, she tried to distract herself by tending to her beloved garden, stepping outside to check on the tomatoes and peppers, only to discover that the simple pleasures of kneeling in the soil brought little relief from the echoing tension in her mind. The usual joy she found in nature felt distant, overshadowed by the memory of cold stares and dismissive words. And though she gently patted the earth around her plants, it was clear her heart wasn't in it. She felt a knot form in her stomach when she thought of returning to any dealership, worried that her newly minted distrust might turn a routine errand into a source of anxiety, a sobering realization for someone who so cherished her peaceful routines. As the sun inched lower, she retreated indoors and flicked on a small lamp near the sofa, bathing the living room in a soft glow as she sank onto the cushions, drained from the emotional turmoil. For a long while, she simply stared at her phone lying on the coffee table, her fingers twitching with the urge to call her husband, to hear his voice and to be reminded that there was still goodness in a world that could sometimes feel harsh. The memory of his quiet confidence emboldened her enough to finally pick up the device, and with trembling hands, she selected his number, heart pounding as she listened to the ringing. His warm greeting on the other end instantly eased some of her tension. Yet she still found it difficult to speak, her throat tight with residual hurt and fear of ruining his day with her troubles. Mustering her courage, she recounted the morning's events in careful detail, her voice quavering as she admitted how belittled she felt and how painful it was to be treated like an unwelcome intruder. Gregory listened in attentive silence, occasionally interjecting a soft hum of empathy, allowing her to pour out her frustrations without interruption. Hearing his whispered reassurances of love and respect made her tears well up anew, though these tears were tinged with relief that she was not alone in her anguish. She explained that she didn't want to cause a scene or blow the situation out of proportion, but the dealership's blatant disdain felt like a betrayal of the human decency she so deeply believed in. Gregory's voice, gentle yet resolute, assured her that she had every right to be upset, and he asked her pointed questions to better understand the exact nature of the insults cast her way. Although she could sense a note of anger simmering beneath his calm tone, he carefully chose his words, emphasizing that she was not at fault and that no one deserved to be humiliated in such a manner, regardless of their perceived status. For a moment, Rebecca worried that Gregory might rush to confront the offenders directly, exposing his wealth and power in a public spectacle that contradicted the modesty they both valued. But he surprised her by remaining composed, focusing on soothing her emotions rather than seeking immediate vengeance. She felt her racing heartbeat slow as he assured her that respect is not a privilege reserved for the affluent but a fundamental courtesy that every person deserves by virtue of their humanity. They spent the next few minutes discussing the possibility of contacting the dealership's corporate office or finding a different service center altogether, though Gregory ultimately deferred to her comfort, making it clear he would follow her lead. Still, a part of Rebecca trembled with the knowledge that Gregory's protective instincts, combined with his vast resources, might lead to a response more powerful than any she could single-handedly muster, a realization that brought her both comfort and disquiet. By the end of their conversation, the heaviness in her heart had lifted somewhat, buoyed by Gregory's unwavering solidarity, though the sting of the day's events still hovered at the edges of her thoughts. Feeling oddly vulnerable, she placed the phone down and ventured into the kitchen, deciding to prepare a simple meal in an attempt to reclaim some sense of normalcy. Cooking had always been a soothing ritual for her, and she found a small measure of solace in slicing fresh vegetables and stirring them into a steaming pot, the comforting aromas reminding her of life's small, steadfast pleasures. Yet even as she stirred the pot, her mind drifted back to the memory of disdainful eyes and hushed whispers, the tangible signs of classist judgment that she had once believed were relics of a shallower world. Her appetite waned, replaced by a swirling mixture of sorrow and indignation, and she wondered whether she should share her experience with her neighbors or her closest friend at the soup kitchen, seeking validation that she wasn't overreacting. Although she prided herself on her ability to remain gracious in the face of adversity, she found her usual sense of calm replaced by an insistent question of what it truly meant to be gentle in a world that sometimes respected only power and wealth. The night crept on, the sky shifting from dusk's warm hues to the deep indigo of evening, and she set aside her half-eaten dinner to stand by the window, her gaze drifting across the silhouette of the sleeping town. She felt a pang of longing for a world in which material possessions were not used as a measure of a person's worth, a world where kindness and decency reigned supreme, untainted by avarice or superficial judgments. In an attempt to capture her muddled thoughts, she retrieved her weathered journal, flipping to a fresh page beneath the soft glow of a nearby lamp, then paused as her pen hovered above the paper, uncertain how to distill her swirling emotions into words. When she finally wrote, her sentences were raw and candid, an outpouring of heartbreak and hope. Heartbreak at witnessing firsthand the cruelty bred by superficial arrogance, and hope that her compassion would remain unbroken in the face of it. As she closed the journal and rubbed her fatigued eyes, she glanced at the clock, realizing how late it had become, though the usual weariness that followed a long day refused to ease her restless mind. She walked through the house, double-checking doors and windows, but this time the act of locking up felt laden with a new unease, as if she were guarding not just her home, but her wounded heart from the harshness of the outside world. Under the gentle hush of darkness, she climbed into bed and switched off the lamp, whispering a silent plea that tomorrow would prove a kinder day, and that her spirit, though bruised, would endure. Although the ache of rejection pulsed faintly in her chest, she began to drift toward a fragile sleep, comforted by the lingering warmth of Gregory's unwavering support and the knowledge that her capacity for empathy was a strength no one could truly diminish. Even in her half-conscious state, she resolved to hold onto the lessons gleaned from her painful experience, hoping to use her compassion as a shield against bitterness. If anything, she realized this ordeal had opened her eyes to the plight of countless others who suffered similar judgments daily, reminding her that empathy could be as powerful as any form of retribution. Eventually, exhaustion triumphed, and she faded into dreams that interwove the memory of the glittering dealership with her grandmother's old rocking chair and the warm security of home, a gentle tangle of symbols reflecting her quiet resilience. Through the hush of night, the seeds of the next day's resolve took root in her heart, for even in the wake of humiliation, her unwavering kindness continued to flourish, ready to bloom anew when the morning sun arrived. Gregory Hamilton's private jet touched down at a small, exclusive airport just beyond the city limits, its engines roaring softly against the early morning hush as he stepped onto the tarmac, a man both formidable in stature and gentle in gaze, unaware of the storm brewing back home. He clutched his phone in one hand, flipping through messages and meeting notes with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to juggling billion-dollar decisions. Yet his thoughts were already drifting toward Rebecca, sensing a subtle tremor in the usually sunny tone of her recent texts. By the time he settled into the back of a waiting limousine, he had begun to piece together from her quiet words that something unsettling had transpired. A suspicion confirmed when he finally listened to her hushed voicemail, trembling with wounded pride and heartbreak. Concern etched itself into the fine lines around his eyes as he replayed her words, picturing her gentle spirit crushed beneath the weight of condescending glances and careless insults. Though Rebecca had asked him not to worry, her voice betraying a desire to handle the matter on her own, Gregory knew at once he could never be at peace while she nursed that pain in silence. He had built an empire on strategic thinking and swift action, forging partnerships in the highest echelons of finance, but this personal crisis demanded a different kind of decisiveness, one guided by love and an unwavering desire to shield his wife from further harm. Upon arriving at their modest home, he exited the limousine, bidding the driver a polite goodnight, and quietly let himself in, setting aside his own exhaustion in favor of seeking out Rebecca, who was dozing fitfully in the old rocking chair she adored. The sight of her tear-stained cheeks made his heart clench with a potent mix of sadness and fierce protectiveness, and he stood there for a few moments, taking in the vulnerability that was so at odds with her usual steadfast optimism. Careful not to wake her too abruptly, he knelt by her side, brushing a gentle hand across her brow, murmuring her name until her eyelids fluttered open and she recognized him with a soft gasp of relief. They embraced in silence, her body trembling as the events of the past day flooded back, and Gregory waited with infinite patience while she gathered her thoughts, unwilling to rush her into recounting the details. When she finally spoke, her voice was strained, each word laced with heartbreak, as she described the dismissive reception she had received at the dealership, the stinging remarks insinuating that she was unworthy of their attention or their business. Gregory listened intently, occasionally drawing in a slow breath to steady himself, feeling anger flare in his chest like a distant thunder, though he maintained a calm exterior for her sake. He knew well how callous some could be, having battled arrogance and elitism all his life, but to hear that his gentle, selfless wife had been humiliated struck a chord that resonated beyond mere indignation. Even so, he took care not to let his anger overshadow the tenderness she needed, stroking her hand and softly reminding her that none of this was her fault, that she was deserving of respect and kindness, irrespective of who she was married to or how much money he possessed. Her tears returned in earnest, spilling down her cheeks as she confessed how small and unseen she had felt, how difficult it was to maintain her composure in the face of open contempt. Gregory's gaze darkened, his thoughts already drifting toward how best to remedy this injustice without compromising the humility he and Rebecca both cherished. He assured her that he had no intention of turning the incident into a tabloid spectacle or throwing money at the problem. Instead, he vowed to stand by her side, using the subtle power of his influence to uphold her dignity rather than to flaunt his wealth. A contemplative silence enveloped them, her head resting on his shoulder as she clung to the warmth of his presence, heartened by the quiet determination she felt in the steady rhythm of his breathing. At length, she took him by the hand, leading him to the small kitchen table where a pot of tea still simmered on the stove, its soothing aroma weaving through the hush of the night. They sat together, sipping tea in the comforting glow of a single lamp, and with each passing minute, the tension in her posture relaxed, replaced by the renewed certainty that she would not have to face this alone. Gregory gently pressed for more details, wanting to know every sneer, every dismissive phrase, each moment of humiliation, so he could address it with clarity rather than hearsay. As she reluctantly recalled how the dealership staff accused her of wasting their time and implied that her aging sedan did not merit their attention, Gregory's jaw tightened, though he merely nodded, taking mental notes. He asked if she had gotten any names, any business cards, but Rebecca only remembered fragments. A cold-eyed manager, a tight-lipped receptionist, and the glaring lights of the showroom reflecting in polished floors. With tenderness, he reassured her that even partial information would suffice, that truth had a way of unraveling arrogance if approached with patience and principle. She frowned, afraid that she had disappointed him by not standing up more forcefully for herself, but he hushed her doubts, explaining that refusing to sink to their level was a show of integrity, not weakness. He told her stories of his own early struggles, of arrogant executives who dismissed him until his business acumen and unshakable resolve proved otherwise, reminding her that dignity speaks for itself over time. Through that conversation, Rebecca felt a newfound resolve stirring within her, less of a desire for revenge and more a yearning for justice, for the simple right to be treated as a human being worthy of courtesy. In the soft glow of the lamplight, Gregory pressed his lips to her brow, promising that he would address the matter in a way that honored her character, with no showboating or intimidation. Sleep-deprived though he was, he could not rest until he formulated a plan, one that would involve neither lawsuits nor public grandstanding, but a pointed demonstration of the respect his wife had been denied. As the clock neared dawn, Rebecca finally convinced him to rest for a few hours, guiding him to their bedroom where the bed sat neatly made, its worn quilt a comforting reminder of quieter days. Still, the tension in his muscles belied the calm of his words, and she knew that he was wrestling with a potent mix of anger, sorrow, and an unwavering desire to right the wrong that had tarnished her spirit. When morning arrived, Gregory rose early, leaving her a note that he needed to handle a few matters before breakfast, a courtesy that allowed her to linger in bed, gathering her courage for whatever lay ahead. His first task was to place several calls, tapping into the vast network of contacts he'd built over the years, quietly seeking information about the dealership's ownership and corporate hierarchy. While he'd always preferred anonymity in their personal life, he had no qualms about leveraging his connections to hold those responsible accountable for their behavior. In the process of these calls, he discovered that the dealership was part of a broader chain, owned by a businessman Gregory had once met at a charity gala, a detail that sparked the kernel of a plan in his mind. Normally, he might have delegated such inquiries to his assistants, but this time he felt compelled to handle it personally, ensuring that every step aligned with the respectful, measured approach he believed Rebecca would want. By mid-morning, he had orchestrated a series of discreet phone discussions with executives who expressed shock upon hearing about his wife's treatment, promising immediate action. Still, Gregory remained cautious, recognizing that corporate apologies alone might amount to little more than empty words if the offenders themselves failed to learn the true gravity of their misconduct. Determined to avoid a mere hush-up settlement or a neatly packaged PR statement, he crafted a plan that would allow the dealership a chance to rectify their error in person, under his watchful eye, and more importantly, under Rebecca's. When he finally returned home, he found her in the garden, tending her plants with a quiet introspection that tugged at his heart, knowing that her trust in human decency had been deeply shaken. He approached slowly, kneeling beside her among the rows of tomatoes, allowing the gentle rustle of leaves and the earthy scent of soil to envelop them before he spoke of the steps he had taken. She listened with a mixture of relief and apprehension, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and the faint worry that such direct confrontation might exacerbate her sense of vulnerability. Gregory assured her that he would never push her into a situation where she felt unsafe or exploited for spectacle, emphasizing that this was about restoring her dignity, not punishing people for the sake of punishment. The understanding between them was tangible, as though a chord had been struck that resonated with the same gentle harmony they had always shared, and she nodded slowly, leaning against him in a silent gesture of acceptance. He whispered that soon enough, they would return to that dealership, or rather, invite its leadership to meet them in a setting where Rebecca felt comfortable, effectively reversing the imbalance of power that had emboldened those staff to belittle her. She blanched at the notion, remembering the humiliation she endured, but his reassuring tone and the tender light in his eyes suggested that he would handle the details with delicacy and respect for her emotions. The moment reminded her of why she fell in love with him. His quiet strength, the way he channeled his considerable influence not for vanity or coercion, but to uphold the values they both cherished. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they shared a simple lunch at the small kitchen table, discussing the potential ways to ensure that the dealership staff truly understood the harm they had inflicted, rather than merely apologizing out of fear of repercussions. Gregory suggested contacting a local nonprofit that specialized in teaching empathy and customer relations, perhaps incorporating that as part of a broader resolution. The notion touched Rebecca deeply, aligning with her steadfast belief that even those who err could learn and grow if given the right resources and guidance. Although she knew that not everyone would be receptive, The possibility of transforming ignorance into compassion restored a glimmer of the optimism she had lost. Later, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, they stepped outside to enjoy the cool evening breeze, strolling side by side among the wildflowers that framed their modest property. Gregory held her hand gently, turning the conversation toward the future, explaining that the next steps would be hers to decide. Whether she truly wanted to face those people again or whether she preferred a more private resolution. She hesitated, recalling the scornful faces and biting words, but also feeling a stirring resolve to show them that their cruelty had not broken her spirit. The hour was quiet, punctuated by the chirping of distant crickets, as she confided in him that perhaps she owed it to herself, and others who might endure the same prejudice, to stand up, if only to prove that wealth is not what grants a person the right to respectful treatment. Gregory, hearing the steady conviction in her voice, slipped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close as he whispered how proud he was of her courage. Their footsteps guided them back indoors, where they settled for the night, secure in the knowledge that they would face the coming confrontation together, armed not just with Gregory's resources but with the unwavering power of their love and Rebecca's resolute grace. That evening, before drifting to sleep, he found himself marveling at the intricacies of fate, recognizing that for all his billions, the greatest treasure in his life was the resilient warmth of the woman beside him. He resolved that no matter the path they took, every step would be measured by her comfort and guided by the shared principles that had bound their hearts together. In the hushed darkness, she nestled closer, feeling the comforting strength of his presence. And though the memory of the dealership's insults still lingered, it was tempered now by the faint glow of renewed hope. Through the union of her gentle spirit and his measured influence, they would seek both acknowledgement of the wrongdoing and the possibility of redemption, a balance that spoke directly to the compassionate worldview Rebecca cherished. As she drifted off, she silently thanked fate for gifting her a husband who refused to let greed or status define him, a man who wielded power only in service of kindness and justice. Though the confrontation that lay ahead might stir old wounds, they both understood that enduring lessons could rise from adversity, propelling them toward a future where appearances no longer dictated worth. If there was a lesson in this ordeal, it was that real strength lay in empathy, in maintaining moral clarity even when the world rewarded superficial measures of success. The night passed gently, and in the quiet hush of pre-dawn, a sense of calm resolution filled the small bedroom, as the steady cadence of their breathing aligned in perfect harmony, signaling that together, they were ready to face whatever trials awaited. The morning sun glinted off the polished hood of Gregory's sleek Bentley, creating shimmering highlights that danced across the driveway as Rebecca slowly approached the passenger side door. Though she hesitated for a moment, a swirl of nerves in her stomach, she resolved to meet whatever awaited her with quiet dignity, reminding herself that this was about principle rather than revenge. Gregory, dressed in a tailored suit that exuded understated confidence, walked around to open the car door for her, offering a gentle hand to help her settle in. When he slid behind the wheel, the engine purred to life with a low, powerful hum, and Rebecca felt her heart flutter at the sudden reminder of the vast difference between their private life and the opulent world this vehicle symbolized. As they set off, the reflection of sunlight through the tinted windows fell upon Gregory's determined expression, and she realized how fervently he wanted to stand by her, no matter the outcome. The ride felt surreal, the Bentley gliding effortlessly along the small-town roads that had rarely witnessed such a high-end machine, and neighbors paused to watch it pass, curiosity evident on their faces. Rebecca turned her gaze to the passing scenery, attempting to calm her racing thoughts by focusing on the comforting familiarity of old storefronts and quiet side streets. She remembered how, not long ago, she had driven these same roads in her battered sedan, feeling like a ghost amid a world that barely noticed her, and the stark contrast now set her nerves on edge. Gregory reached over to give her hand a reassuring squeeze, wordlessly conveying that he understood the complexity of her emotions, and that they faced this challenge together. The closer they drew to the dealership, the more the sense of anticipation settled between them like a charged current, crackling with the possibility of confrontation or, perhaps, acknowledgement and amends. By the time the dealership's gleaming facade came into view, Rebecca felt a tightness in her chest, but she steadied herself, recalling the vow she had made to maintain her composure and advocate for respect. The Bentley smoothly rolled into the lot, tires crunching softly on the immaculate asphalt, attracting the immediate attention of several sales staff who were accustomed to flashy arrivals but not quite at this level. Gregory parked in a prime spot, stepping out with an air of calm self-assurance, while Rebecca followed suit, her heart thudding but her posture upright, prepared for whatever might come. The morning light caught the car's emblem, turning it into a shining beacon that seemed to announce their presence. Yet the onlookers did not immediately connect the elegantly dressed man with the unassuming woman they had once dismissed. A tall salesman in a crisp suit approached, his eyes flicking toward the Bentley, and he adopted a practiced smile as he greeted Gregory with effusive compliments on the vehicle's grandeur. Meanwhile, Rebecca stood quietly at her husband's side, watching the staff member offer them VIP treatment without realizing the irony of how she had been treated just days ago. Gregory, in a voice of measured politeness, introduced himself and nodded in Rebecca's direction, his expression giving no hint of anger or condescension, merely a firm resolve to handle this matter with dignity. The salesman, picking up on the subtle cues of power and wealth, immediately summoned the dealership's manager, a call that sent a ripple of apprehension through the staff as they scrambled to accommodate a potential high-profile client. Rebecca found herself glancing around at the polished floors and sparkling cars, recalling the very spot where she had stood in near invisibility, waiting for someone to grant her a modicum of respect. A hush fell over the showroom as the manager emerged, her meticulously styled hair and sharp suit exuding authority, though Rebecca recognized her instantly as the very woman who had brusquely dismissed her. At first, the manager's demeanor remained professional and welcoming, but there was an undercurrent of tension in her gaze, as though she sensed something more complex than a routine sales call unfolding. Gregory politely requested a private conversation, and though the manager's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise, she complied, motioning for them to follow her into a glass-walled office adjacent to the main showroom. Once inside, the manager offered them seats, but Gregory politely declined, stating that their time was limited and that he wished to address a matter of pressing importance. Rebecca could sense the manager's mounting unease, and though her hands trembled slightly, she mustered the courage to raise her chin, meeting the woman's eyes with a quiet, unyielding steadiness. Gregory began by explaining that they had come to the dealership seeking an open dialogue regarding an incident in which his wife was allegedly treated with disrespect and promptly turned away. The manager's expression shifted from mild curiosity to guarded apprehension, though she tried to maintain a polished facade, glancing briefly at Rebecca as if attempting to place her face. Rebecca's heart pounded in her ears, recalling the sting of that day, yet she forced herself to speak, reminding the manager of their interaction and calmly recounting the dismissive words she had endured. A flicker of recognition dawned in the manager's eyes, though she remained silent, allowing Gregory to reinforce that his wife had come for simple car maintenance, only to be insulted and ushered out. The color drained from the manager's face as comprehension set in that the woman they had scorned was in fact the spouse of a man who could afford any automobile on the lot, many times over. Rebecca, in a measured but unwavering tone, explained that she did not come here to humiliate anyone or flaunt wealth, but to seek respect for any customer, regardless of their attire or perceived status. Gregory's presence alone seemed to make every staff member passing by the office hyper-aware of the gravity of the situation, and the manager's once confident composure crumbled into visible anxiety. Desperate to salvage the dealership's reputation, the manager began offering apologies, stumbling through platitudes about misunderstandings and high standards, clearly unprepared for this revelation. Rebecca listened intently, her expression neutral, gauging the sincerity in each frantic word, still uncertain whether the contrition stemmed from genuine remorse or simple self-preservation. Gregory stepped in, emphasizing that he had no interest in lawsuits or public scandals, but that he did expect a meaningful acknowledgement of the wrong done to Rebecca and steps to ensure no one else experienced the same. The manager, recognizing the seriousness of the matter, conceded that her staff had been trained to prioritize high-net-worth clients, but admitted that, in her pursuit of exclusivity, she had allowed discrimination and disrespect to flourish unchecked. A silence filled the office, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. As Rebecca mulled over how to respond, torn between relief at hearing an admission of fault and the residual hurt festering in her memory. Compassion warred with her lingering sense of betrayal, yet she recalled how Gregory had counseled her about forging a path that upheld their values, and she softly stated that if the dealership truly wished to make amends, it should strive to treat every individual with dignity. The manager, swallowing her pride, offered to personally oversee any future services Rebecca required, to which Gregory merely nodded, remarking that gestures of policy change and staff retraining might hold more weight than individual favors. Though the tension remained thick, there was a sense of resolution in the air, as though a necessary reckoning had taken place, shining a light on how easily judgments can be formed and how crucial it is to see the worth in every person. With that, Gregory and Rebecca turned to leave, the wide-eyed staff parting to let them pass, and Rebecca walked beside her husband with her head held high, grateful that they had confronted the dealership's prejudice with steady resolve, a display of quiet strength that would linger long after the Bentley's taillights faded from view. In the wake of the emotionally charged confrontation at the dealership, a quiet transformation began to unfold as the echo of harsh words slowly gave way to genuine reflection. The dealership staff, still reeling from the piercing gaze of accountability, exchanged tentative glances as the manager, visibly humbled, stood before Rebecca and Gregory with a sincere expression of regret. There was a palpable silence in the glass-walled office, a silence heavy with the weight of unspoken apologies and the hope for redemption. Rebecca, still composed despite the turmoil of the past days, listened intently as the manager began to outline a plan to rectify the wrongs that had been inflicted upon her. With her voice soft yet unwavering, the manager admitted that the actions of her staff had not only been unprofessional, but had also betrayed the core values that the dealership once held dear. Gregory, his posture relaxed yet his eyes burning with quiet determination, nodded in agreement, emphasizing that respect and dignity were virtues that transcended any transactional relationship. In that moment, the manager promised to implement comprehensive customer service training, aimed at dismantling the biases that had allowed such discrimination to persist unchecked. She pledged to create a new set of guidelines that would ensure every customer, regardless of their background or appearance, would be treated with the courtesy and respect they deserved. Rebecca felt a cautious sense of relief as the manager offered not only an apology on behalf of the entire dealership, but also a personal commitment to change. The sincerity in the manager's eyes, though tinged with remorse, sparked in Rebecca a glimmer of hope that perhaps this incident could lead to lasting improvement. Outside the office, the buzz of activity in the showroom had quieted, as if the entire staff recognized that a turning point was upon them. Employees who had earlier been complicit in dismissive behavior now appeared introspective, their expressions softening with the realization of their shared responsibility. A few of the younger staff members exchanged tentative smiles and whispered words of regret, acknowledging that they, too, had been swept up in a culture of exclusivity. Gregory suggested that the dealership host a series of workshops on customer empathy and diversity, inviting experts who could shed light on the value of inclusivity. The manager readily agreed, her voice imbued with the conviction that genuine change required not just words, but concrete actions that would resonate through the organization. She extended an invitation to Rebecca to return for a complimentary service, assuring her that every detail would be handled with the utmost care and respect. Though hesitant at first, Rebecca recognized the significance of the gesture as an opportunity for healing and the chance to witness transformation firsthand. Over the following days, Gregory maintained a discreet dialogue with the dealership's corporate headquarters, ensuring that the promised reforms were set into motion. The dealership soon organized a small event dedicated to community engagement, where staff members participated in interactive sessions designed to challenge their preconceived notions. In attendance were not only the employees but also local community leaders and regular customers, all gathered to observe the dealership's commitment to change. The event was marked by open discussions, role-playing scenarios, and reflective exercises that encouraged every participant to see beyond the superficial markers of wealth. Rebecca attended the event with Gregory, her presence both as a participant and as a silent testament to the power of dignity in the face of adversity. As she listened to the candid confessions of staff members who had learned from their mistakes, a sense of closure began to replace the lingering bitterness of past insults. The dealership's owner, who had been unaware of the extent of the internal issues, made a public statement affirming that respect and customer satisfaction were now the cornerstone of their operations. The owner expressed sincere remorse for the actions of those involved, acknowledging that the incident had revealed deep-seated flaws in the company's culture. In that moment, the dealership committed to a transparent review of all customer service policies, with the aim of rebuilding trust within the community. The new guidelines emphasized personalized care and the belief that every client was valuable, irrespective of their background or the vehicle they drove. A representative from a local nonprofit specializing in customer advocacy was invited to monitor the implementation of these changes, ensuring accountability at every level. The transformation was not instantaneous, but each small step taken by the dealership contributed to a gradual shift in the attitudes of its employees. Customers began to notice the change, remarking on the more attentive service and the respectful manner in which inquiries were handled. Rebecca, though still cautious, allowed herself to hope that this might be the turning point that bridged the gap between luxury and genuine human connection. Gregory watched with quiet pride as the dealership staff evolved from a group defined by arrogance to one that embraced empathy and understanding. The turnaround became a topic of discussion in the local community, and soon, other businesses took notice, inspired to re-examine their own customer service practices. Rebecca's own experience, once a source of quiet pain, transformed into a catalyst for broader change, demonstrating that even the smallest voice could provoke significant reform. Over time, she received heartfelt notes from staff members who expressed their gratitude for the lesson in humility and respect that she had inadvertently imparted. Each message reaffirmed her belief that kindness and resilience were powerful forces capable of overcoming even the harshest prejudices. The dealership began hosting regular community events, creating a space for dialogue between employees and customers, further solidifying the bonds of mutual respect. Gregory and Rebecca continued to work together to support these initiatives, their partnership growing stronger with each shared success and challenge overcome. In the months that followed, the dealership's reputation improved markedly, becoming a symbol of redemption and a model for ethical business practices in the region. As Rebecca and Gregory drove home one cool evening, the soft hum of the engine accompanied by a renewed sense of purpose, they both knew that the journey toward true respect had only just begun, and that every act of kindness and accountability added another thread to the rich tapestry of their shared legacy.